And I ask our first panel participants to come on stage. The first panel is tasked with an impossible task to talk about the role of festivals in times of neocolonialism. But I'm confident it's going to be a wonderful discussion because it's in the hands of a very special moderator who asked to be introduced very, very shortly. So very shortly, Dr. Fiona Siegenthaler, who is an art historian and social anthropologist with a specialization in the interdisciplinary field of contemporary African art, performance, and visual culture. And I cannot not add also a member of Artistic Advisory Board of Culturescapes Sahara 2025. Fiona, the floor is yours.
It's working, yes. Thank you very much, Katerina. And welcome to our panel. To the first panel on the role of festivals in times of neocolonialism. And let me make a short introduction before introducing the panelists on the table. The term decolonization was mentioned several times already, and also critically, rightly so, I think. It's also part of quite some debates, also on a theoretical level. Decolonize the museums in Europe, decolonize the universities in Africa, decolonize cultural relations, and decolonize value chains, and decolonize festivals. The call for decolonization has been loud and global in the last mainly 10 years, but it has been existing for much longer. While the discourse on decolonization grows exponentially and we lose track of the staggering number of theoretical publications about the topic, we are still left with the question, what is decolonization in practice? How can we make it a reality in our everyday work, life, and relations? And I think Gone came up with really very impressive examples of how this can be realized. Is there hope for decolonization if capitalism is a fundamental part of today's coloniality, meaning the persisting colonial matrix as conceptualized by Anibal Quijano and Walter Mignolo? How can societies, groups, individuals at the lower end of power chains or power dynamics claim legitimacy and primacy of their languages, beliefs, knowledge systems and cosmologies in a globalized and capitalized world based on Western but also other forms of hegemony? How can we promote decolonization in cultural diplomacy if the primary languages used in the conversation remain those of the former colonial powers and the temporary economic giants? Kenyan author, playwright and thinker Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who passed on to the ancestors in May this year, pointed more than half a century ago to the enormous challenge of decolonizing our minds in a context of colonial language dominance. Coloniality is not just a question of military power and economic dominance, but involves dominance of aesthetic, epistemic, and cultural forms and values over others. And there I really appreciated your contribution with regards to knowledge production and the decentering of that knowledge production. Even today, we still continue, and also this day, we continue the tradition of adapting to the dominant language of global art discourse, and we speak English. Although English is a foreign language for most of us sitting on this stage today. However, I think we should reserve the right to deviate from this standard if we see that things can be conveyed better differently. So now I'm very happy to introduce you to Reem Allam, Sahad Sarr, and Sandro Lunin for this conversation. Reem Allam is the Associate Director in Artistic Planning at the Art Center of New York University in Abu Dhabi. She has worked as an executive manager and artistic programmer for the Downtown Contemporary Arts Festival, in short, DCAF in Egypt. She also was the head of the Cairo Industry Days at the Cairo International Film Festival. Sahad Sarr is a musician, social activist, and environmentalist. He's the frontman of the Dakar-based band Sahad and part of the Culturescapes artistic program. This evening he will in fact play in the Kaserne, so keep it in mind. He founded the Camiac Eco Village and established the record label Stereo Africa 432 and the Stereo Africa Festival in 2022. And Sandro Lunin was, among other, the program director of the Zürcher Theaterspektakel before he became director of the Kaserne Basel until his retirement in 2023. During this time, he was responsible for 2 editions of the biennial Theatre Festival Basel. He has been a consulting expert and board member for numerous committees, networks, and institutions. I would like to give you the chance to introduce yourself as well, or the focus of your work, in combination with my first question to the 3 of you. Entering straight into it, where and how have you experienced coloniality in your very concrete work? Ngonefal already told about many experiences she had in Paris in preparation of her festival, and I'm sure you also encountered similar, but perhaps also very different experiences. Could each of you describe a particular event, moment, or observation from your work context to exemplify how coloniality or neocolonialism in a more larger and economical sense play out in the programming and organization of contemporary festivals?
Thank you, Fiona, and thank you to the festival. It's a pleasure to be here. So as Fiona mentioned, I currently work in Abu Dhabi. So basically, New York University NYU has a campus in Abu Dhabi. And inside the campus, we have the Arts Center, which is composed of 3 theaters. And we get to program work from all over the world throughout the year. And we also host festivals. But before that, I worked for 7 years managing and curating the festival in Cairo. And I think through this work, it was most relevant to your question about the neocolonial influence. Because in Cairo, basically, as many countries in the Arab region, we do not have local arts funding. We don't have an arts council that can give us grants. There's no public support to independent arts. So our only way to survive as independent festivals and organizations is to rely on foreign funding. And this comes either through foundations, like with DCAF, for example, we had an annual grant from a Swedish foundation and from an American foundation, and also from all the embassies or foreign cultural institutions that existed in Cairo, like from Pro Helvetia for the Swiss, British Council for the UK, the American Embassy, the Danish Embassy. So this is how we can survive basically and do a festival. But of course, the most annoying thing for me that I felt being a curator for this festival is that I knew if I wanted to invite an artist from the UK, the British Council would support immediately. They had the money, it was easy. But if I wanted to invite an artist from Colombia, from Uganda, from Morocco, their embassies don't have the money, and we don't have the money either, so it becomes much harder to afford to bring those companies. And of course, we felt, of course, the bias in our curating, and we tried to challenge this in many ways.
Hello, my name is Sahad. I come from Senegal, West Africa. I'm an artist, a singer. I found an eco-village and a festival in West Africa, in Senegal. First of all, it's so important for me to say that, I'm really happy to be here. But, always I'm trying to say that it's not easy for us, because we were colonized by the French first. I had to learn how to speak French. And even today, I had to force myself to speak English because I'm more comfortable to speak in Wolof. But I know that here, nobody speaks Wolof here, Yeah, just go and speak Wolof. But, and for me, it was interesting to say, okay, first of all, when we have to speak and to talk, I'm more free to speak on my own language, but here, I have to force myself to speak another language again. And this is happening every day in my work, in my music, on my festival in West Africa. And I can give a lot of examples. For example, because you already said, in Senegal, for example, when you are a musician and an artist, you have to be friend with the French Institute. You have to be friend like this, with the French Institute, with the Goethe Institute, with the Spanish, because they will define who will be seen. Who will be seen? They will define why they should think about that. Yeah, your own music have to be international. What does it mean? Like when you play with the French, they're going to give you the possibility to have some visa, to make a European tour, and to arrive here, and they give you an imaginary of success. Yeah, because now I'm playing here, I'm a big artist. And there's a lot of artists between us in Senegal that they have this imaginary of I'm becoming a big musician, a big international musician, because I'm playing in France, I'm playing to Paris. And now everyone will have a place to play in France or in Paris or here in Basel. Because people who give the funding and the money, they provide a lot of things for us. Like they say, they have to teach us how to make a festival, because we are not enough organized to make a festival. If you want the money from the French or from the Goethe Institute, they want to ask you. They will ask you, but Sahad, I want to see your own programmation. Because we give the money, we provide the money. Because the public funding in our government are not giving a lot of public funding from the Senegalese for Senegal, for Senegalese producer or musician. Like we can give a lot of kind of example, and we don't have choice because there's not a lot of other alternative to have money for organize our own festival, for organize our own tour without begging the French Institute, without begging the Dutch Institute. And we know that a cultural institution is never neutral. It's never neutral. They have their own imagery, their own narrative, what they want to sell. And it's pity because today they are selling an idea of African music in Europe. It's not our own vision of African music. It's the vision of the French Institute, of all these foreigners and European Institute, how they want to sell our own music. And today, we have to make ourselves in books. I don't like this when people say, you make world music. I say, but what is world music? Yeah, you make Afro. I never heard we say you are making European music. I never heard. But I heard a lot. But you make Afrofusion, Afro-funk. But why we need to put us in a box like you are a musician from West Africa, from Senegal, you make Afro. And to speak French, you don't speak English, we make you in a box of world music. But if you speak French or a little bit English, you are an international, really global artist. Like I'm fighting every day for create a new narrative, but our own narrative. Like not the narrative that the French Institute want to show. For example, when you have to apply for receiving some fund, they always gonna choose what is the priority for us, in which thematic, in which subject we have to, work. But I'm not gonna talk a lot just because I'm gonna let after. But okay, it was just yeah.
It's fine. Thanks. So very quickly, maybe my parcours tells a bit how it came that I worked a lot with African artists. I come from a different background. I was a teacher, then I was becoming a technician in theater. I didn't went to university. I went to directly then from in a small city theater. From the technical side, I could change to be the assistant of directors, and so I could learn different theater languages. So my field is really the performing arts. I became then, had the possibility to work in a cultural center called the Rote Fabrik, which came out of the big youth riots in Zurich out of the 80s. So it was really one of these spaces which for me, and for my identity were extremely important. So this movement was for me really a big revelation, how it's possible to create space for independent art and being part of an 18-headed collective to run this space teach me a lot. It was also very complex and very difficult. In that time, I created then a festival for young audiences, because I always thought it's also very important in the arts that you have the same quality and the same also contemporary art possibilities in the field of young audiences, which were often like very kitsch or still very kind of conservative forms of approaching children. And for me, it was very clear they must have the same quality, they must have the same complexity of art as we do it for adults. From there, I made a step to Bern, to our capital, where I had the possibility. There was created a house for contemporary theater and performance called the Schlachthaus, an old abattoir in the middle of Bern, and there I collaborated. We were first 3, then 2 directors for this house to work with the local community on the other side, and on the other side for children and youngsters and for adults, and working also internationally. So I started to collaborate with artists mainly out of also political awareness on one side, with a focus on Lebanese, Palestinian, and Tunisian artists in cooperation with our Arts Council Pro Helvetia, which had this office in Cairo, but has a specific office in that time in Geneva, which could do bigger other projects, which was called L'Autre Méditerranée. And on the other side, I started out of concrete projects of a Zurich group with Dani Kouyaté, one of the sons of Sotigi Kouyaté, a co-production for young people around stories of Hampa Deba. And I was agreed to show this work, but I was also on the other side. I thought, yeah, but it's fine that you tell these stories, but I want also pieces for adults which speak much more from today, and not retaking Hampa Deba as with these really beautiful stories, but yeah, that's a kind of cliche of the African. So I started then to travel on the African continent, and when you ask the shock moment, when I arrived in this context, it was really this what you described brilliantly, and you too, this domination of the French Institute. Because in theater, it's really terrifying. It was really, it's these little kingdoms, and then you have a queen or a king from France who decides who enters and who don't enters. And additionally, you felt a lot in the production that there's also, they have to produce in the French system. So there is a director, and there is an author who is writing the text, and then you have actors who have to follow it. I mean, I have to say, this was 25 years ago. I mean, it's not like, it has changed a lot, and I think it's more important also to speak about the change it has become, because in the same time was born a beautiful festival in Ouagadougou, Les Recréatrales, which then started to work in a completely other system. They asked 6 groups from all over Western Africa to come to Ouagadougou to work there for 2 months, to have workshops together, and then in the quartier of Gunga, in the north of Ouagadougou, they created this festival at one street going from Goudron to Goudron. And they worked with the local populations. The theaters were in the courtyards of the people. And so there was really a complete creation of their own, which I really had a wonderful experience. Even the languages changed. It was not only French performances, it was also in Bambara or Moré. So it was, yeah, for me, a super important moment. And then to start there also cooperations, co-productions, but we can speak about that later.
Did I understand you right, that the Créata also is funded also by the French Institute, or is there a different funder behind?
The festival was mainly funded by organizations like Doen Foundation from the Netherlands, and I mean there was some French money as well in it, and I cannot say how exactly the funding system for the festival functioned, but yeah, it was mainly so-called development money and some cultural monies from like these big foundations, or like Africalia from Belgium, or yeah, it was. But now I think they have also a small part of the city of Ouagadougou in their budget, so they are also financed by Burkinabe.
Yeah, that's a nice example actually also how the funding system can also be perhaps not completely decolonized, but still shift the power play in financial terms, and at the same time coming with this, of course, also in programming, in the election process, in the formalities which are expected or not to adhere to when you submit for a cultural program. That's something I also experienced when I was in Uganda, talking with artists there who mainly find funding through the Goethe Institute for their projects, and many complained that they must stick to a very clear application procedure, which was not really the way they normally would practice to get money. So for many, even just applying for that money was kind of a learning process into which they were forced, and was not actually similar to local practices of finding money. So that's quite interesting. So all three of you mentioned the funding situation and how these institutions also dominate. This leaves us with the impression that actually the national support from the countries in which such festivals take place is rather limited. Let's say the Emirates or Senegal as the hosting country. What's the role of the government in guaranteeing this funding? Senegal is a especially interesting case because it has still this reputation from the 70s and 80s of having had an artist as a president who was also very dedicated to funding structures. Yes, or in Switzerland we have the case of also governmental funding, but of course we're also in a time where nation states are put into question, where also many nation states have other priorities. What is your experience? What role is does the nation state have in supporting events in their own countries? Yeah.
So what I was saying earlier was my experience in Egypt, where I'm from and where I've lived and worked. But with the Emirates, it's different. So I moved to the United Arab Emirates 2 years ago. And it's a country in the Gulf. And for us in the Arab region, the Gulf has much more resources, much more money than the rest of the Arab region. Yes. Which is like very ironic, but of course you think of it as a very capitalistic place, very materialistic place. But as a curator, there was more freedom to invite work from all over, because at the art center where I work, it's funded by the government. Actually, the whole university is funded by the UAE. And we are flexible. We already have a budget, and we are flexible to invite from wherever. So we just had like a production from South Africa, and before that there was a production from Sri Lanka and Rwanda, and I would never even think of having Sri Lankan or Rwandan artists come to our festival in Cairo because of the economic situations and many others. So there's a bit more like freedom in that. Of course, there's other limitations, there's other censorship issues, but we face this in the Arab world in general. And I feel because like we've been, as you said, there's no national support in general for independent arts. We've been relying too much on Europe and North America. But in the past years, because of all the funding cuts and COVID and all the shifts in political situations, like at some point Egypt was like a hot topic for Europe because of the Arab Spring and revolutions, but then it's no longer this, and we lost so many funds because of that. So I feel now organically Arab artists are looking towards the Gulf more, and because the Gulf has opened up and is investing in the arts, which is something new, and because there's spaces, like where I work in the Arts Center, we have amazing theaters and facilities. Like when I arrived there 2 years ago, I was like, wow, there's a proper theater with proper technical team, with equipment. So I got so excited to invite artists from the Arab region and from other countries that don't have those opportunities, and to start more having cross-Arab collaborations. So I feel, yeah, there's an organic shift, and there's, like for example, Sharjah in the UAE, there's a Sharjah Foundation commissioning and hosting lots of performing arts from the Arab world. And you have Saudi investing in music. Like, of course, I was very critical, for example, about Saudis opening up to the arts and all this, but I found like friends of mine in Egypt who work in very alternative music landscapes, and they're starting to sign up to record labels in Saudi. So it's giving opportunities not just to commercial or mainstream artists, but there is a shift, there is something happening. We're still going to see how like this is going to happen, but yeah.
But that's quite interesting, because if I understand you right, this means also the capitalist system, in the sense of investors investing into art because they earn a lot with oil or whatever, can also be an alternative supporting perhaps some kind of decolonization from previous powers. But of course, there's another danger of a new form of domination, I guess. But that's a really nice example, because it also shows the potential within the capitalistic system to actually replace some existing power dynamics. What do you also have observations in that direction?
Yeah, I can say that in Senegal, I wasn't there, but in 1966, like it was the first Festival Mondial des Arts Nègres. Was maybe mostly funded by the government of Senegal. I'm not sure if they just received the money all from the government. So, but I think that since that time, I never saw the government from Senegal putting a lot of money in art in general and culture, because in a country that is not our own priority, it's not the priority. Like every time we are fighting, like okay, we need culture, we need music and art, but in the political scene, people are always talking about other things and others' priority. Even in the imaginary of Senegalese people, when you make music or when you make art, it means like, okay, man, you are not really serious. It means you have to go to school, you have to speak French, you have to become an advocate, or you have to become someone. Like, you know, in the imaginary, like being an artist is not really serious. And you think that our government, mostly like they think that, okay, why I will take a lot of money and make a lot of funding for artists, because people, they don't have something to eat or something to, words to say. And they may make a big mistake, because art and music and art as a placement for development, for example. We believe that, but I understand in another perspective that they have a lot of things to handle that they don't think about. We have to help our institution, our cultural institution. They make amalgam, comment on dit amalgam en anglais? Yeah, oh my God, they make amalgam between what have to be a festival. What is the definition of a festival? Or, for example, this definition come from where exactly? It's just for make a big programmation, exhibition, music. People I say yes, it's nice. Or you want to really build something with the audience, with the Senegalese culture, to make something in the head, in the own imaginary. Or we are just making like a pluridisciplinary, like even just putting money and a lot of artists and making money inside and it's finished. What is the aim and the main goal for a festival. Like, what is a festival for me, and what is a festival maybe for you? You know, and what is maybe, like, people are always choosing what they have to propose to the audience. And I think that in a community, we have to build together with the festival organizer, like with the funding, like with the government, what the audience, what the people they want to see, what the people they want to hear, but not imposing always our own perspective of programmation. It's the same thing with some higher artists in Senegal, like elite, or the elite, or the intellectual, for example. I'm talking often to my brother. I say, you know, guys, you're always bringing here some kind of big program that the audiences, the Senegalese people, they don't understand what you want to say and what you want to share. It's not fitting with our own imaginary. It's not always, even it's so interesting to deconstruct a lot of things, so but you have to make it with a way of how the audience want to see it, and not imposing always, like, I'm on the stage, we will make a programmation for you for the festival in Dakar. No, we have to ask to the community what is interesting for the community, and to deconstruct even the way of seeing a stage and urgency. It's the same thing happening because, oh la la, trauma psychologic of the colonization. Even the African people are making the same thing with their own audience. Like, we always have to decide what the audience need, you know, because it was a psychological trauma from the French or from the colonizer. And first, we have to decolonize this perspective. Like, we have to maybe get more humility and move into the people, to the communities, and try to ask the community, what is your own solution? What is your own narrative? Yeah.
You before mentioned the festival in Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, which is actually could be a quite interesting case at the moment. I'm coming out of the blue with this question, so you're apologized if you're unprepared. But actually, Burkina Faso is a really interesting case at the moment because it's one of the three Sahelian countries who decided that they're going their own way now with the putsch. Actually saying, no, we are really fed up of the French colonizer, we will continue without. That was, of course, a decision and a political move which was highly controversial, discussed internationally, also with the fear of growing Russian dominance on place. It's quite interesting now also to hear that you actually came up with a very interesting case of a festival which seems to have found its own way of realizing itself with a bit less dependence on the French Institute. What is your impression? Do you think that such independence as the Communauté des États Sahéliens trying to formulate, do you think that can promote decolonization of festivals on place, or is this just a new way of austerity?
No, I think it's just, for me it was really a very interesting case how it was possible to create really a complete a festival which really included the community. Also in the process, it's a biannual festival, but really the setup, how they built the festival is then over really more than 2 months that they really live there, that they have also now a small theater in this area where they work continuously, and they really include the people of the area living there. Also, they include them in the economy of the festival, which then they open their street kitchens for the audiences coming. And I was really deeply impressed, and there is some festivals now who follow that, like in Bamako, Les Practicables is a festival now in Bamako functioning in a similar way. They don't invite now European or African productions, but they invite some African directors or also some European directors to work with young actors, dancers, artists to over a month or 6 weeks to create on the spot in Bamako these creations, which Stefan Kegi, for example, from Rimini Protocol is now there this year, or Michael and Chris, Collectif Dardar from Kinshasa, who work constantly also in the last festival there. So they built there really a community with young artists to set up a festival in also on the streets, in the courtyards, and try also to find really their own way to create these kind of events.
Which also means creating local economies and community, as you also mentioned. And with this, perhaps also a more sustainable form than what we know of the world festivals or things like that. Do you think that there's really kind of awakening of a desire to push more Pan-African or inner African and mainly locally rooted, it's the wrong word in such a context, but still locally anchored projects? Do you think that's a trend that might be also leading into the future a bit more, also in the practice? Or is this... yeah.
Difficult to say. I mean, I hope that this happens, but I think one of the big problems is yet the possibility on the African continent to work with other African countries is often very difficult, and often there is a lot of handicaps to do that, and you will not find funding for it, or it's extremely difficult to find funding for it. So there are still, I think, huge handicaps in that way. And even these institutes which we spoke about, the French or the... I mean, I know it mainly from Helvetia, from our Arts Council. They have, on the African continent now, they have these 2 offices in Joburg and Cairo, and these very one-person offices in Uganda and in Lagos. It's now, I think, but it is really one-person offices. So they try slowly also to open to triangle possibilities, so that a project can be between Switzerland, South Africa, and Cairo, for example, and that includes the exchange between Cairo and South Africa. But that's a very new move, which is still also here very, it's not acknowledged by the government yet, or it's really like a new way of thinking that this so-called South-South exchange happens also in that way.
In some way, you could say it's a kind of unconditional South-South exchange, in the sense of that the cultural diplomacy, which was in the beginning of these institutions, like bring our Swiss culture to Africa, or bring our French language to Senegal, or whatever.
Yeah, but it's still, I mean, still money for private is for export, that we have to be very clear. And it's really only in the field of residencies that the exchange is possible. And all money which was invested by the Swiss states, by SDC, by the Swiss Department of Foreign Affairs, these 4 million which have existed, they were cut now for 29. So they say also, yeah, we have to invest in military, we stop to invest in culture. So the so-called South Cultural Fund, which give the possibilities for bands or for theater or other cultural events, they are cut now from the Swiss state.
One challenge, especially when you speak about international festivals, is indeed also the how is culture transported or conveyed. And you mentioned like the problem with the so-called world music. It's boxed in a way that it tries to speak to international audience. At the same time, you also mentioned artists in Dakar who actually are not really interested in these more elitist ideas of art practice, because they also think it's kind of a passe-partout according to the French cultural understanding, and they rather want to, discuss local traditions and work in local idioms. How should I say? Are festival colonial? The international festivals? Are they colonial in principle? Because often they are actually, in some ways, they try to bridge cultures, to connect societies with each other, to transport different ideas of cultural values. But in how far can they also be colonial in the sense of forcing artists to speak not only certain linguistic languages, but perhaps also aesthetic languages to be understood? Or, I mean, it's a bit a polemic question. I know that you can't answer that so easily, but is there kind of a homogenizing aspect about cultural festivals? In an international context, because there's also kind of this move where you often feel when people feel globalization is too strong, let's withdraw and look to the local. And perhaps even now also with the funding of cultural exchange shrinking, this may also trigger such a movement. Is this something that we should welcome or rather not? Will we lose the connection by withdrawing more to local contexts?
Like, of course, if when you invite international artists, you have to think of the local audience because, like, for example, in Egypt or in the Emirates, we cannot have a show with nudity, for example, okay? So if we bring this, not only will we be imprisoned the next day, but also the local audiences will not accept and will not engage. And so you didn't really have a culture exchange then you just like did something like very away from the local culture and you lost the audience. So of course there's restrictions that when we invite international work, it has to fit within the culture. Not just because of the legalities, but because you know the people, you know their cultures and customs, and you want to provoke them, but not to the extent for them to leave the theater and then it's over. So there are very thin lines that you play with. But I think, like as I mentioned, because we rely so much on foreign funding, the only way for us to feel that it's not such a colonial approach is to always have a two-way exchange. Like Sandro was giving example of Pro Helvetia. We tried also always, when we get money from those foreign foundations, we ask them for the opposite as well. Like, for example, the British Council gives money for British artists to come to Cairo. But then we had a project to bring Arab artists to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. It's just like the biggest festival in theater. We want to expose Arab artists to be there. And we asked the British Council to fund those Arab artists to go to Edinburgh, and they did. So this was a two-way thing where they knew, because they knew that we could not afford to travel all these people to Edinburgh. They helped in that. Of course, we still faced issues, and 3 out of the 10 shows didn't get the visa, and it was a whole news headlines thing because the year of Edinburgh that year was diversity and everything, and we still face this. But at least this made us feel that it's not a one-way approach where we're getting money from the West and importing their culture, but also we can send our artists. And we also do this by inviting programmers, like we asked Pro Helvetia or the Dutch Embassy to give us money to invite festival directors to come and see work by Arab artists in Cairo. And then if they tour, they get the opportunity to tour to those countries after being seen. So we're still using the money of the foreign foundations, but to invite programmers to get Arab work to Europe instead of European work to the Arab world. So that's how we can make peace with it and try to have a two-way thing.
Yes, okay.
No.
You know, of course, it's normal. For example, if I'm a programmer, I will always book a project that because I want to sell a kind of imaginary for the music. And what happened now, for example, especially in Europe, when like I used to face a lot of issues like this, like sometimes I came from Senegal with my band and we arrived in a big festival, like in Oslo in Norway, and before playing, people had some kind of expectation. As they're coming from West Africa, it's normal, they want to sell the exotic ways of selling African music. And we have to wear big things, a lot of color, a big thing like this, and making a lot of noise, and making some, they are expecting some things from Africa. And when you don't play this kind of thing, you say, but, so no, it was not this exactly, because okay, I'm really sad because they play funk. It's like really universal music, but I was not expecting this kind of music. Why every time I feel like, even at the airport, if I meet someone, are you a musician? I say, yes, but you play percussion. I said, no, I play violin. I play violin. I said, wow, yeah, I play violin. So, but why an African musician have to play percussion? And it's normal, yeah, you play percussion, you are making percussion. It's some kind of stereotype. And unfortunately, a lot of kind of festivals, they like this because they don't want to educate their own audience. And the audience are not aware that when you make a music, you are selling a culture, you are selling a lot of things, and you are showing a lot of imaginary. And we cannot just reduce our all imaginary to just some little things. And of course, there are a lot of festivals. They have a paternalism way of making the programmation, because they want to sell things, exotic things, a vision of what is African music. And we are always faced with this kind of problem. And I think that people we have to bring others alternatives, like to create a lot of exchange, a lot of discussion between the artist and the audience. How the audience have to receive the show, to educate the audience that no, we don't have to wait. For example, yesterday, I was happy a little bit for the show from yesterday, like because when I saw they are from Morocco, naturally I'm waiting for some kind of things, Naturally, I say, okay, they are from Morocco. I heard them singing Berber, yeah, and they try to deconstruct things and say, hey, it's not because we are from Morocco, so that we have to stick just on one kind of artistic proposition.
Yeah, that fits also very well also with what Ngone Fall actually said before, how imaginaries are constructed and shaped expectations either from the audience or even from the government itself or the president himself. But it also shows how much weight actually then lies on the shoulders of the cultural producers and the festival programmers to counter this image and really say we do something else and really make that decolonial step. But somehow it always pushes the person coming from the African context into that role of having to educate, having to explain, having to say that I'm not what you think I am. And there I'm also wondering how much can also festivals support people in correcting this image. And might be now I speak to Sandro, who has also a big experience in that field.
Yeah, I think these cliches, I mean, in Zurich Theaterspektakel, there is at least experience also from an audience for about 45 years of seeing international works. Also in Basel, there's a huge people are experienced to see that. And for me, it's a complete normality that also in this society, we have to listen to and see different voices from the African continent or Latin America or the Asian continent. For me, it's like, this should be the everyday offer, and it's not. I mean, and the exchange for sure makes it sometimes really complex because in some cases the economic gap is really massive. I mean, from what we earn here compared to some of the African countries, it's so extreme that this cooperation sometimes is really not easy, mainly also in the field of co-production then, in theater or dance, what it means to share, what it means to produce also together works. Yeah, but for me it's a clear must and a clear normality that we have to continue to work in this field and really to share. I think even should be also big city theaters, they should be forced, or they should be in their contract with the city that they have to invest some part of it, not only in their own local field, but that because there is really the big money going, it's still 85% in theater and dance, which is going to these institutions, that there must be also part going to other communities and to the exchange with other communities.
That's a great suggestion. That's something I often think, because many say, well, we can't do this work because of structural constraints or whatever, but if cultural policy would actually say, now we introduce the structures which make this possible, then there's also a certain obligation to facilitate more cooperation, more shared time, more equal working conditions.
And I think another, I mean, to avoid what you said also about this kind of exotic pick-up of certain points, I think what is really necessary that you work in long-term ways with certain landscapes. I mean, again, I come from theater and dance, but that you invest in the collaboration with artists over 5, 10, 15 years, maybe if you change even your post. I think this makes it really possibility on one side to going deeper into this collaboration. It builds really this trust from both sides, which is absolutely necessary, I think, and also that you as a really the privileged side are not deciding about artistic contents, that the artist is completely free how he's, and that there is the trust from the artist that I give him this co-production money for his work and not that I tell him what he has to do. And this you have to build, this you have to construct. And so there is maybe also my question mark a bit, and Julia knows that, to culturescapes, that you jump each 2 years to another landscape and you lose all the contacts and all the investment you have done. And it's also the only way if you, that you get also kind of in contact with the next generation in these countries, and that you not just repeat companies which just, how you see them tour in Europe, oh yeah, this is now that one, this is this one. No, that you have really, that you invest and that you find systems in your house, whether with residencies or this focus or possibilities like we invented Watch and Talk, which invites young artists from all over the world to the festival, which don't have the obligation to perform first, but they can just come and see and discuss together with the dramaturg how things are going, and maybe 2 years later they come with a small piece into your festival, so that you build also with the next generation, really that you give perspectives to this exchange.
I think that's a very promising perspective, because it clearly it breaks this divide between the host and the guest, or the audience and the performer, but actually creates a community in which you work together and actually share also a common goal. Do you, Sahad or Reem, also have suggestions for perhaps one suggestion of what could be changed, perhaps also in a perspectival way in the future, what aspect could be made different than so far, and what to make a festival also less colonialistic?
Like I feel the approach we're having in the Art Center in Abu Dhabi is when we invite an artist, like they have to come for 5 days at least. and so not just a model where they perform for one day and leave the next day. And this is because it's it's a university that we're part of. So the artists have to engage in more like educational activities. So they give a workshop or be on a panel, and then they visit the classes, they visit the students to ask them questions, etc. So like this creates a more of a long-term or impact instead of just we're importing this work, you see it entertaining and they leave. But like, of course, like what I think is something I would like to change for the future is to have more commissioning opportunities for Arab artists. Because like I mentioned, we don't have enough venues, we don't have enough funding. So for example, at the Art Center in Abu Dhabi, we hosted an Egyptian theater maker called Layla Sulaiman. Like she was already there teaching temporarily, but we gave her the theater for 3 weeks to develop her new production. And this was a great opportunity because there was technical support, there was everything. And she developed her piece and made a work in progress. And then she went back to Egypt, she continued working. And now she's going to premiere it in the Arab Arts Focus in DCAF in Cairo, where I used to work. So I felt this was like a full circle kind of thing where we are in the Arab region, there's different resources we're trying to share. There's talent there, there's a theater there, there's funding there. So we're trying to have this, it's an attempt to have a more cross-Arab collaboration. Of course, it's not easy. Like I feel I was lucky enough to be in a place where I had this chance, but not everywhere. So yeah, this is where I feel there's hope or change instead of the model that we're used to. So yeah.
Yes, okay. For example, for me to have a fully decolonized approach festival is impossible. Now, right? It's impossible now. No, it's impossible. Because just, for example, the branding is a capitalism way of thinking. A branding, yeah, I'm selling something, is a product. It's impossible. So, but what is really important to, how do we behave? How do we make our festival? The process that we are building for make a festival, maybe can be decolonial, but a fully decolonial festival is impossible right now. Yeah, because we need funding, we need tourism, we need more marketing, and this is an opposite with with decoloniality, because decoloniality come very far what people are thinking, but make community-based economics. For example, in Senegal, since 3 years, we are trying to work between Senegalese people. We are there that, okay, we don't want to receive any more of the money from there. So, but we will make a way of, we will create a way of funding ourselves, our own festival. We have a lot of friends in the private sector that they have their own money, and they can come and help us and to deconstruct a relationship between the donor and people who receive. So, but even with the French Institute and the Goethe Institute now, for example, in our festival, we are not sending them email or we want fund. No. So now they want to participate in our festival, and we will change the partnership to say, okay, so now is a partnership now. It's not like a dominant relationship that we need your money for make our festival. We don't need any more your money for make our festival. But if you want to be a partner with us in an ethical way, there's no problem. You send me an email, I will look at it, check it, if it's interesting for me, and I will answer. But it's not like I have to have the number of the director for the French Institute because I want to send her a message. No. And we change the paradigm, the way of organization. And even, for example, when you have to make a report, a financial report for French Institute, or I don't know, the Goethe Institute, but in our imaginary, in Senegal, we have 70% people who are living in a life like in a, what people say, informal way. People, even it's not nice, it's informal. It means that, no, you don't understand our way of organization. And this you are saying that is informal. But it is an organization. It is unstructured. But if you don't understand our unstructured, you will say, it's not well organized. So, but what is organization? How in our village we think about organization? Organization can be other things. But if you are always waiting the structure and the standard of your own organization, but it not will work with us. And even today, I'm really happy to not always following the European standard of organization in my country, because it's not my own standard of organization. Like, I go to the shop, to my village, with my horse, and you want that I give you a receipt. Where I'm going to find a paper for bring you a receipt that I pay something? No, because we are living in another imaginary. But if you want to make really new good relationship, people have to understand the other kind of narrative and imaginary. And there's not just one way. And it's a vertical way. Like always there's people there, they will spread what is organization, what is festival, what is structure, what is funding, and we have to always take. No, it is a horizontal way. Like there's multiple kind of imaginary of way of doing things, and this we believe it. And today with our festival, we are trying even to not name it a festival, because even naming it is accepting that people give us a way of, and we have to create our own, our own name, our own definition, and make a reappropriation for have a fully decolonized festival. And even the Europe don't have to be the center every time. Why the Europeans have to be the center for our festival? No, we don't need them for be our center. Like I used to say, like even every festival in Senegal, they want to have a partnership with England, France, blah, blah, blah. But there's Burkina Faso, there's Mali, there's Guinea-Bissau, there's Eritrea. And you don't know what happened there. And you always want to make your eyes somewhere. You always need une reconnaissance. A reconnaissance, en anglais? You know, we need always a reconnaissance by the Europe. It means that you are a good festival. Even with the standard of a good festival, we need Europeans to say to us, you are a good festival. So, but why African, we always need a reconnaissance of. I used to talk about even intellectual. A lot of intellectual is the same thing. When the French make, wow, you are good, they are happy. But there is a lot of things to see in West Africa, you know? But why we, and today, for example, me, in my festival, I'm always trying to build some bridges with Burkina Faso, with Mali, with Eritrea, with Angola. And even when the Europeans, they want to come and say, okay, I invite you, you can come and see, and live another experience. And no master class, no workshop. We don't need master classes, workshop. Before teach you something, we know our own business, and we don't need it. But if you want to learn, we will make you what we say a hospitality, critic hospitality. Like we're not going to host you as you want it. We want to make some friction, some fighting that you can be aware. Because if you are really like this, you're not going to learn something. I bring some artists from Europe. They arrive at the airport. They say, what I'm going to do? I say, look, Google Maps, and you will see where we are. It's not our business. You have to learn that, okay, it's not easy to learn in our own environment. To be an artist is our own environment.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that was very perfect concluding statement, also linking very well also to Ngone's presentation, where it's us who define the terms, and this also gives to the person in charge also the space of agency to define with their own means. So perhaps it's also possible without this constant dependence from other sources. Thank you very much to all of you for your contributions. I'm not really sure how we are with time, if we have still 5 minutes left, perhaps for questions from the audience. Ngone, I give mine.
It's more about some comments. It's the privilege of being an old person and having witnessed so many things that happen over the decades. I'm 58, so be careful. You have to call me auntie. I know I don't look 58, but I am over 58. Recreatral, I know Etienne Mindouk very well. He's a buddy who started it, then handed it over in 2018 to Aristide. It's a very interesting model, and it will not survive without the French money, just to make it clear. Without, Institut Français keeps on selling Recreatral as their golden egg, as the best example, which makes me also doubt, and I've been telling Etienne over the years, the moment you have such a high validation from France as a former French colony, you better freak out, because there's something going on. To say that is also to remind everybody that whether it's Institut Français, Goethe Institute, their agenda in the countries around the world is to promote their country and their language. They are not here, the Goethe is not here to promote Egyptian culture or Arab language, etc., etc., etc. That's their mandate. And that's why most of these organizations are, their boss organization is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of their country. That's the agenda. The same with Pro Helvetia, when they will say, oh, but you have to collaborate with the Swiss, or you have to have the Swiss involved. Why? And to be the devil's advocate, I'm a French. I'm a French taxpayer. Why does my money go to people all over on the other side of the world? I can't even put that country on a map. Actually, I don't even care about that country. Why is my taxpayer money going to over there? Why isn't the country itself doing it? It says a lot also about the lack of interest of our countries. And it's not just Africa, because I saw the same situation in South of East Asia, where our countries are not investing in culture. The nature doesn't like when there's an empty spot, so others are taking the opportunity to promote their own political agenda. So you can call it neocolonial, whatever you want. But if you are not aware of the fact that these countries have their own agenda, and I know many institutions, organizations, festivals, biennials, who stopped when the funding, foreign funding stopped. The Kampala Biennial was one example. When France said, I'm not getting more, it stopped. Bamako Photography Encounters, created by the French, parachuted in Bamako. After decades of criticism, they handed over to the Malians. Now, there's a Malian director, young curator, struggling. Where did he find money for the last edition? Qatar. Very interesting. Qatar and Morocco. But what's the motivation of Qatar? To give very, very little over there. So you have to be aware of all of that. If you take aside big foundations that are more, let's say, international, like Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, who don't have a clear political agenda because they are not national organization. So they don't impose or dictate. But all these other, whether it's Dune, I know them all. I've assessed their programs, and challenged them. We then never were friends anymore, but I think that was part of the therapy. To tell people, sometimes you have to hear the truth, and sometimes it's hard to hear the truth. But we also have to blame our own leaders that we voted for or didn't vote for, that they don't want to invest in culture. And then based on that, how do we stop putting ourselves in the situation where we are beggars and always accept to play the power domination game with the West? You have a model for Africa 2020, what I didn't mention. I also went to African companies and foundations to make sure that the money is not 100% French. But that was just symbolic, to say we are not here to beg. And actually the African and French and African foundations and company did pour more money than the French companies. That was also an interest. That's why at the end it was very, very difficult for the French to cope with me. Huh? So the more I got criticized, the more I was thinking, it means I'm doing well. But at the end of the day, that's the main thing. How can we find money without being beggars and stop the power game? Locally, there are some solutions. South Africa has been looking at some solutions. Nigeria, capitalistic, so the money comes from local banks. But the Sahel countries, they are not putting money in culture. So if France withdraws, I don't know what's going to happen to the amazing Recreatral. And in all these countries, Egypt is I put that also. How do we find ways to stop being inferior? Because by applying for money that we know that the money comes with conditions, you are going to promote my artists, so they are already having a say in your programming, which you pretend you don't want. But how do we change that? And what kind of other economic models can we find to do things, unless some of us win to the European lottery and can start an art fund?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fiona, for leading this panel, and thank you for the panelists' different contributions. I have been listening to what you've been saying, and the question of money appears to be a central question in the conversation about the possibilities for an art scene to exist independently. Now, it seems as if within different African societies, from what I know of them, there are people that are private citizens who are rich, who have money. And these people are not seen to be investing enough, at least, into the cultural sector of their own societies for the cultural sector to evolve in a manner in which at least there's a sense of creative freedom on the side of the artists. Now, is there a conversation that has not yet been had between these people who have private means and the artistic communities in the many different African countries? I mean, at least two of them are represented on this stage. But I'm just wondering, I'm really coming to this question without really knowing at all whether something like this has happened. But is there a conversation that hasn't yet taken place? Because it might be that these private citizens who are rich have an understanding of culture that doesn't match what they see on the cultural scene, or that the cultural scene as it exists today, because it's been caught for decades in relationships of dominance with Institut Français, with Goethe, with etc., has been shaped in a manner that actually looks more like what a cultural scene is supposed to look like here than it is within its own society. Do I make sense? So these are questions that I'm asking myself as to whether some conversations need to happen still in order to define a relationship over which there is an agreement as to what it is that is culture, what it is that is art, what it is that is music, etc., and how it is that this is going to be supported. I mean, it's honestly an open question.
Thank you very much for this question. I will keep very short because I would like to hand on to the colleagues. But I think that's a very important question. And I think that Dakar is indeed a very interesting place to think about that. Also, if you see in the context of the biennial, there have been several initiatives coming from rich citizens within the biennial context. But exactly promoting art understanding, which is perhaps not the one which the majority of the population would share. But there I'm not an expert for Dakar. We have 2 here, so I will not say too much on that. I think that certainly plays a role. From what I also observed, and that's a quite, perhaps that's also just a claim, but indeed, I think what you also said about this the formal ways of funding things and the informal ways of funding things have a different appeal to especially also European audiences, where the formal always looks very regulated and correct and legally binding, whereas the informal is always a bit dubious in the eyes of many modern Western states, because there is not this kind of way of accounting perhaps, which you would expect in a more formal way. So, and especially Africa has always been the burnt child in that issue because of indeed corruption and the like. It would often be the fear very big that informal ways of supporting art is also another way of dominating or making politics. And I think that's quite a difficult aspect. But just this, I think my impression is that indeed that there are wealthy people who are very interested in supporting art. And I think also in the griot tradition, there is also the paying client who will have songs commissioned. But perhaps you would like to add something to this. Sorry, it was slow.
No. You want to start? No, as you were asking your question, something came to mind that's a bit funny because, like I mentioned that in the Arts Center in Abu Dhabi, we're funded by the government of the Emirates, but actually we have a private sponsor. And when I learned about it, when I first got the job, I was laughing in my head because it's Van Cleef & Arpels, like the French jewelry. And I was a bit ignorant that I didn't know that they had this whole dance section where they do dance festivals and contemporary dance. And I was very critical, of course, like a French jewelry sponsoring us, like this is going to be very elitist, etc. But like the main person who's responsible for this was the director of Pompidou in France. He's originally Algerian, he's French, originally Algerian, so it was different than what I thought a bit. Still, their curation is elitist kind of, but they gave us a chance that we also select choreographers from our choice and they will sponsor. Okay, so the idea is that they sponsor only dance. Like if we invite contemporary dance, they will give us the money. And last year, I invited a choreographer from Lebanon called Omar Rajah, and he's a very political activist. Like he has his own festival in Beirut, and I was laughing with him because like it's so absurd that as an Egyptian curator inviting a Lebanese choreographer in Abu Dhabi by a French jewelry money. So it's like it's very weird. And then for next season, we are actually also, through this sponsorship, we're inviting an Algerian choreographer called Nasira Blaza. She's a female French-Algerian choreographer. And she's coming to work with local dancers. So in UAE, there's only one contemporary dance company because the whole world of contemporary dance is very new. So we feel, this also comes to this idea of like, are we gonna stop this whole approach of always inviting companies from the West to perform? So we thought it's maybe useful when we invite an artist to also let them work with local dancers who may not have experience of the same level, but through working with an experienced choreographer, they would develop one by one. And then we start having productions by local artists that are the same quality as the international things. And this is also through this jewelry sponsor. So yeah, it was just an absurd thing that I always think about, and it's a reality. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I just realized, unfortunately, we don't really have time left to go continue discussing this important question, but we will have now a break. So there is chance to also talk about it over a coffee. And we're back at the 4:15, 20 past. What do you think? 20 past 4?
We have 25 minutes for coffee break.
Okay, 25 minutes of good, meaning so after 5:30.
20 to 5.
20 to 5. 20 yes. To 5, we meet again here for the next panel. Thank you very much to all for your contribution.